To remain updated with the latest business news, click on the bell icon.
Presented by Ebix Cash. हर खुशी के लिए काफी है.
Hello and welcome to the Business Today show. I'm Udayan Mukherjee. My guest today has the unique distinction of being the man with the happiest mind in Indian industry. A true pioneer in the Indian technology sector, he first spearheaded Wipro's technology business for a decade and a half before going on to start the hugely successful Mindtree. And when that journey ended, he has now started Happiest Minds, one of the edgiest technology companies in India, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome for you on the show Ashok Soota, Executive Chairman of Happiest Mind Technologies. Ashok, very good to see you after a long time. How are you?
Very well, Udayan. It's great to see you too. It's over a decade since we last spoke, and both of us are now in new avatars.
Yes, that is very true. But I wanted to ask you about this name thing because it was Mindtree and now Happiest Minds. The word mind seems to be a continuous strain in your entrepreneurial ventures. I mean, I'm curious, indulge my curiosity. Should it reflect the fact that you have a philosophical bent of mind, or is it something else?
Well, these things are coincidences. In the way Mindtree came about was much more through a search that we did on Name It, came through a number of names. And of course, you have to go through the process of getting the URL and so on. However, Happiest Minds, I would say that happiness was very much on my mind. And one focused, I think, in a very self-entry, and Happiest Minds is much more emotional. I once again went through the process of submitting 3 names to the registrar of companies, made sure I could get the URL, and fortunately, my first choice went through with Happiest Minds.
Now, as I was saying in my introduction, you had quite a checkered journey. From 15 years at Wipro, spearheading that business, and then Mindtree. And when the Mindtree deal happened, you were not exactly in your 40s. You could have said that I have done it all. I did Wipro's business and then I started my own business and made a grand success of it. I can hang up my boots and walk away. There's nothing else to prove. But at that age, you went on to start Happiest Minds. Was there a sense, in a way, of an unfinished agenda or an unfinished business which propelled you or gave you that energy?
Well, you must appreciate what happened in terms of my movement from Mindtree. Whereas everybody in the world understood the rationale for my leaving Wipro and starting an entrepreneurial journey, the reasons for leaving Mindtree were never explained. But the beautiful thing about this is that I converted what I would think of being a problem into an opportunity. And that is really one of the philosophies in my life, that whenever you have a problem, try and see what opportunities exist within. My tenure at Mindtree would have come to an end anyway in 2 years' time. This gave me a new runway. And the nice thing is it worked out for the greater good of all concerned.
So are you saying that despite the way it happened, you did not walk away with any bitterness?
Oh, absolutely not. And the good thing is the way it happened, it took a little while to adjust, but all the ex-founders are good friends. They keep in touch. Many of them consulted me while they made their own subsequent changes. So as I said, it worked out rather amicably and well.
However, I can see that there have been learnings from that episode, because I read somewhere that you said that you would never let your stake in Happiest Minds or your family stake fall below 35%. Surely there must have been learnings from the Mindtree episode which has propelled you to do things like that.
I would say absolutely, because one very clear learning is that you can't defend your company against hostile acquisitions with founder stake coming down to below 15%, which is what happened to Mindtree. Also, that you can't assume that a white knight, and Siddharth was the white knight, who I actually brought in place for the team as I was moving out. I had other acquisition offers for my shareholding and Walden shareholdings, but I just felt that it would be best for them also. They could then continue with their careers. And it was fairly evident that, you couldn't expect him to be around always forever. He could always have had his own imperatives. So that was learning number one. I would also mention that actually I don't intend to let the stake fall below 40%. And this would still allow me to do fairly acquisitions as we go ahead in our journey for Happiest Minds. So idea is certainly to protect it against any unwanted overtures, and those come all the time in this business.
Right. But tell me about the genesis of Happiest Minds, because I think you're trying to, or you have tried to create a company with a difference. It's not like a vanilla services company. It has so much of a thrust on the digital world. Would you say that Happiest Minds, in a sense, is not any other mid-level or mid-size Indian IT services company?
I would say that the reaction of the markets in itself proves what we've always known. And here I would say that every startup needs a differentiator. And for us, it was a very good differentiator to say that we are born digital, born agile, to be able to say that, look, the only three comparable companies for us are three global companies which are 100% digital. All of them are on a journey, the rest of the Indian companies on a journey to increase their digital content. There is another aspect of the positioning which doesn't get noticed as much, and that is the agile part of born digital, born agile. That's also very important, and they typically go hand in hand. So when we say that we are born digital, born agile, 95% of our business is both digital in content and delivered in an agile methodology.
How big is this digital opportunity? I mean, since 100%, nearly 100% of your business is coming from that area, but yeah, in your eyes, how big is the digital opportunity? Because I was speaking to Roshni Nadar of HCL Tech just last weekend on this very show, and she said something interesting, that the digital opportunity today could be bigger than the Y2K opportunity of his father's generation. Would you concur with that?
I would actually say it's 1,000 times larger. And the reason is that Y2K was a finite opportunity for a finite period. It did help a few companies. I remember HCL managed to enter the real estate vertical, where they probably didn't have much of a presence because of some of their wins there. At Wipro, we were able to enter into healthcare, where we were not present. But look at digital. Digital is throwing out new businesses, new models, new technologies emerging every day. We've had, it all began with the cloud, but today we have augmented reality, virtual reality, blockchain, robotics, drones. Every day there's a new technology which keeps coming out. And that adds to the new nature of solutions you can do. There's another very important thing that it is allowed to enable the digital world, and that is software as a service, which is going to be very important for Indian companies. The distinction between the so-called product world and the services world is disappearing when you deliver software as a service. And we've got many such successes already in India.
Now, given your focus on the digital area, do you think that the kind of growth that you're talking about will enable a facilitator of this business to grow at much higher than the average growth rate for Indian IT service companies? I mean, today, of course, you're growing much faster, but your size is small. But when you achieve size of a certain scale, could you still continue to grow at, say, 25% plus over a multi-year period?
Well, certainly those are targets and goals, and there's no reason why we should not be able to achieve those. And there'll be a couple of reasons for that. One is, of course, the digital world in any case, even let's assume in a steady state basis, the others reach, say, 70, 75%, and we are at 100%. And let's say that that market is flat or even declining. So we've got 100% of our market growing at a much faster rate. And therefore, the weighted average growth should continue to be larger. Also, at our size, when we do acquisitions, they have certainly got a larger multiplier on a relatively smaller base. They're not going to be able to find a company which is, say, 1/3 of their size, whereas we could easily absorb today a company of $50 or $60 million, and that would also add further to the compounded average growth rate. So I don't see a slowdown you mentioned 25%. I think that should be achievable very clearly, at least over a decade.
Wow, that's fabulous. And you have mentioned acquisitions a couple of times already in the last 10 minutes. Do you see that as a very, very real route of expansion for you? I mean, the inorganic route?
Sure. And I think I want to emphasize here, though I do mention it, and it is going to be important, but the organic engine is always going to be larger than the inorganic. It's not that we're going to let it substitute. We're never going to go and do an acquisition for scale per se. but for acquiring new capabilities, new technologies, or new markets where we don't have a presence. So it is going to be important, but also within certain reason and certain boundaries.
Fair enough. Now, you also mentioned blockchain in passing. I mean, since you are so immersed in the digital game, I want your view on where this world of blockchain and a derivative of that, cryptocurrencies, could be headed from here on. Because one hears just disparate views, some bubbling with enthusiasm about it, some absolutely deriding it and completely skeptical about it. Are you somewhere in the middle or on closer to either side of it?
You know, to start with, they're two different worlds altogether. I don't think the blockchain as a technology originated as the foundation for cryptocurrencies. However, now it has moved on to say that it can be built into solutions which the IT industry offers. Maybe other people do too. And we have, for example, used it in the BFSI space, in supply chain, logistics, in our edutech solutions. Whereas cryptocurrency is both, you might say, a platform for trading and an investment. I personally, so obviously, I'm very enthused about blockchain per se. That technology has a great future, and like all new technologies, you keep finding newer solutions where it can be adapted. Every day we'll receive an inquiry and say we'd like to ensure the security in terms of the historical chain that blockchain provides. But in cryptocurrencies, the way I see it is better left to the financial regulators and the reserve banks of the world. I personally, I mean, I'm wary of it. I personally wouldn't dabble in it. And yet you don't know, it's become such a large market that you can't ignore it. And I think India itself will have to find its own way of saying how we're going to live within that world. You could choose any one of two extremes where you have China today and suddenly disowning it almost and blocking it. And you have America on the left, which continues to embrace it. So let's see the way the world evolves.
We'll find out with time. But you're also the right person, Ashok, to ask about this huge digital revolution in India that is playing out in front of our eyes. I mean, you know, these huge digital unicorns, multi-billion-dollar listing every other week. What do you make of it? Do you see it as a sustainable trend? Are you circumspect about it? Or do you think it was a long time coming anyway?
Then this, if you see the phenomenon of the new unicorns, you'll notice that they're all in the B2C space. India, with its population over 1 billion people, hugely growing middle class and people with disposable incomes, we are bound to be amongst the top 3 generators of unicorns worldwide. We were late to start, and now we are beginning to accelerate. I don't see that move stopping anywhere. However, what I do feel sad about is I think India needs at least 20 manufacturing unicorns. But maybe that could be a story for another day. I
Of
would
course, we
also
all know
add,
the reasons why that has not come about. Yeah.
Sure. Let me add, Udayan, one other
Go ahead.
aspect of this. As these unicorns continue to enter into the market, it's going to have a huge impact on the size of our capital markets. And they're obviously making their waves there.
No, of course they are. I want to drag it back to the organization of Happiest Minds, because other than being a 100% digital company and agile, you also have a unique management model, the formation of an executive board, not one CEO as we are used to. I mean, in this day and age where we are used to celebrity and star CEOs, why did you choose to take that path?
Well, you know, this is very much linked with my model of saying I wanted to create an organization in perpetuity. And the main difference is, of course, that the change of the CEO is not a one-off event. Every 4 or 5 years, one of the members will either move into a different role, chairman, advisory role, and a new member will come on. My own experience looking at, I could give you hundreds of examples in the world. And it's all pretty well documented that every 4th or 5th CEO invariably turns out to be a disappointment. And in that process, there's a danger that if the founders are not around, this could lead you into a negative spiral, because getting out of that, it will happen too late. We've seen many cases in India where people obviously didn't have the right CEO, but the founders were able to come in, or the promoter was able to come in and effect the change and avoid that downward spiral. There's also an aspect, and you used that word yourself when you said all these high profile stars. The Economist uses a phrase called the CEO monarchs. They're the new monarchs of today. And I think some things happens in that process which things go down to their heads. Somebody could say that one of the problems in this model would be that decision making would slow down. My own experience with a few years, and it's now about 5 years since we've had the executive board in place, is decision making and implementation are faster because there's consensus with the leaders. Uh, Also, I think our own results speak for themselves. Having said that, how well it will fulfill the objectives of perpetuity, I think will is something which will obviously be known many, many years after I'm not around. But I do believe that conceptually, it's a model which should be able to survive, succeed, and flourish.
No, it is a very highly interesting concept. The only, I mean, if I were to play the devil's advocate, the only problem area could be that, as you said, decision making. Two CEOs or two people in the decision maker's chair might often lead to some kind of friction, which may be papered over in the presence of a very strong executive chairman like you. But you know, other technology companies like Wipro have tried variations of this model to not great success. Do you worry about that? That what could happen when there is not a very strong executive chairman like you around?
You know, I guess Wipro is a good example to take up because I did see some of the problems or the transition. Actually, I'm not sure that they had so much of a problem in their dual CEO issue as they got in maybe one or two of their successors after that. However, I think the difference there is that you had actually two people trying to, and it's not that they had a problem again, as I said. The thing about the executive board is they really function as the CEO. They don't, I need not have been the chairman, if you will, of the executive chairman. Could have functioned on the basis of being, say, in another role also, standing by for them to bring issues which they wanted, either value addition or sound out the fact that, yes, we do have these opinions. They don't necessarily have to come to a consensus. But, you know, that has not even happened more than twice or thrice in these 5 years. So they have increasingly learned to come to their own conclusions, take decisions and move on. And if you do these things objectively, there's absolutely no reason why I think it can continue to proceed smoothly. As I said, in our case, I have absolutely no doubt that both decision making and the commitment behind those decisions is so much higher. And therefore, implementation is faster and smoother.
You mentioned, I mean, the name of Wipro has come up a couple of times in this discussion. So I want to ask you what your time there was like. I mean, in many senses, that would have been such a defining moment or part of your career. And I also want to ask you about your equation with Azim Premji, because he's such a quiet and reserved man that one doesn't get too many insights into somebody or from someone who's worked closely with him.
You know, we have actually, Premji and I have become closer over the years than we were in the past even. And we were very close. In fact, I believe that in my 15 years, I probably saw more of him than maybe some members of his family, for that matter, because he spent so much time in the business. But I think now it's got substituted by a relationship of perhaps mutual respect, understanding the value that each one of us provided to the other. I learned a lot from him, and there's no question that I also did lay the foundation for the growth of the company. So it was a wonderful experience. People may have had some issues in terms of the way they've dealt with him or whatever it is, and there may have been stories published about that. My own view is that he had a tremendous ability to add value in businesses which he never actually directly managed, except for the 2 years that he actually ran Wipro after Vivek Paul also left. And that is a very unique ability to be able to sit in and say, okay, we've discussed this, the decision is still yours, but what about this angle or what about another angle? And that probing that he continuously did helped you to fine tune your own decisions. There's another very important aspect, and that is he never, ever overruled the CEO. Certainly not with me. I don't think so with the others either. Perhaps there were many more decisions to be made in our business, being a very fast changing business. And that is because he would make it very clear, I'm not going to take the monkey on my back. It is your call. We've discussed it. Now you go ahead and decide.
It's wonderful to hear you say so many nice things about Azim. But who are the other people in IT or elsewhere in any other industry that you really admire, Ashok? Because you've had the vantage position of observing so many people over the last 30, 40 years. Who are the people who you would even call mentors?
So inevitably, the real mentors, or if you will, the people I learnt with most, have to be the people in the earliest part of my career. So there was the late Dr. Charitram, head of the Shriram Group of companies. And my first boss, Mr. Bishan Sahai, still very active. He must be 90 plus. And he's still churning out books or chapters of books for another colleague who asked him to contribute a chapter. And then I would go straight on to Mr. Premji after those 19 years of mine in the engineering world. And with all of them, I would say it's a question of learning. And as far as mentorship is concerned, trying to pick up the best of each of one of those three, and therefore bring it together into helping to mold me as a manager or as a leader.
Well, as an active participant in the digital world, what do you think of people like Elon Musk? I mean, again, a figure in the Western world, in the technology world, who draws equal amount of flack and admiration. Where do you stand on his initiatives?
He is such a unique person that nobody can. One has to appreciate the fact that he's always on the leading edge of whatever he's doing. And he's been able to build. The beautiful aspect is that because of the market capitalizations his entities have involved, he's able to build huge war chests to continuously fund industries which really require tons and tons of money. I mean, today we are all obviously focused on Tesla, but he's working on ventures in space. He's working on ventures in satellite and communication. So there's no end to what he's thinking about. And certainly one must admire his ability to be able to do things which are going to change and influence the world.
Maybe he has borrowed that agile phrase from your organization too, because mentally he seems to be very agile.
But he's in a class of his own when it comes to these sort of changes.
Well, I don't know about class, but certainly a size of his own. I mean, then grant you that. But coming back to where we started this discussion, Ashok, this whole business of minds, even in the philanthropic initiative that you have got into, which is SCAN, and you've very generously endowed it with a fairly significant corpus, that also is in the realm of aging and neurological disorders. I mean, involving the mind and mental processes of aging people. So tell us a bit about that and why you chose that particular therapeutic category or medical category to support.
Well, sometimes many of these things begin with personal reasons. So I had somebody within the larger family who had a given neurological problem. And I had always planned that I would set up a center which would help to do research to be able to find solutions. Aging went along with that because so many of these issues get linked to although they all come up much earlier. When you look at neurological problems, frankly, they can come up at any age. I have a very good friend of mine at Nimhans who's actually proposed a project called Cradle to Grave in terms of understanding the way these problems evolve. So fascinating area. Fortunately, I would say that with the success of Happiest Minds and realizing that I now had more, in a sense, funds to be able to contribute to this, I decided to take a broader look, particularly because in my readings, I increasingly began to realize that all these neurological problems are connected together. There is just how the motor neurons within the brain are working and moving, and they respond differently to create these different problems within which are classified as being neurological ailments, whether it's Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, bipolar, and so on.
Well, I wish you great success with SCAN and with Happiest Minds. Ashok, it's a pleasure as always talking to you, and I hope it's not another decade before we speak once again. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Udayan. Great pleasure to speak to you also.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.